Hello everyone, welcome you all to new episode Identity 15 powered by WSO2. So today session is we are going to discuss all about user provisioning. So before I start the session, let me introduce myself first. I'm Ritmi Lokumundali, working as a senior software engineer in WSO2 Identity and Access Management team. So if you guys come across any issues or any configuration related issues or any unclear areas, please feel free to add your questions in our YouTube live chat. So when we can take your questions at the end of the session. So and also after these sessions also, if you guys trying out these systems, if you get any questions, please feel free to add your issues or any concerns in our YouTube channel. So our expert is happy to help you guys always. So let's start the session. Let's see what is this user provisioning is first. User provisioning is an identity access management process that involves creating, updating, and deleting a user account and accessing multiple application and system at once. So let me explain you with the simple words. So everyone us are having user accounts in when you go to the bank or school or any institution, you guys having any sort of user accounts with multiple privileges. So these user accounts, we call it digital identities. So there has to be some process to manage these user profiles, and by giving the appropriate privileges. So this process, we call it user provisioning. There are three methods that we can do the user provisioning. One is inbound provisioning and outbound provisioning and just-in-time provisioning. So throughout these sessions, I'll be describing you with some hands-on sessions about these three user provisioning methods. So you will get a more clear picture on how we do this user provisioning using identity and access management process. So first, let's look at these. What are these provisioning methods? So inbound provisioning, creating and managing user identities in the internal system using an external user store, we call it inbound provisioning. Propagating internal user identities to the external system, we call it outbound provisioning. Just-in-time provisioning, we call it JIT provisioning. So this JIT provisioning is about how to provision users to the identity server at the times of federated authentication. So this JIT provisioning allows the creation of the user's account automatically for the logged in user in any of the identity server. So this JIT, just-in-time provisioning, talks about how to provision users to any of the identity server at the times of federated authentication. So these are some core concepts of these, how we do the provisioning. So let's look at some hands-on session regarding these three user provisioning. So you guys get more clear picture on how we do the user provisioning. So to do the demonstration, I'll be using WSO2 Identity Server latest version, which is 5.11.0. So you can download the latest product pack from WSO2 official website under Identity Server product. And try it now. You will see the installation options and including the zip archive. So you can try out any of the any installation options here. So for demonstrations, I already download the WSO2 IS 5.11.0 version and the zip archive, and it is already up and running in my local machine. So let's first go to the identity server. First log into this management console of identity server. So let's check if there is any users are in the. Okay, so the admin user is the one who is in the user list. So okay, so let's try with the inbound provisioning first. So as I mentioned you earlier, inbound provisioning is we provision a user in the external user store, which is in the internal system. So to do this, I'm using a WSO2 Identity Server as the user store in here, external user store. So I'm trying to provision a user in an identity server. So for that, I'm using a API request. So I'm going to do the scheme call request to the identity server, which is running on 9443 port. So I'm adding authorization of my identity server username and the password. And as the body, I'm passing the username of the user. I'm going to create a provision the user called Jack now. So let's send this request. Okay, so the request is success. Now let's go and go and check if our user Jack got provision in identity server. Go to the user sections. Yeah, so the Jack user got provision by using the inbound provisioning. Jack user got created in our internal the external user store. So that's how we do the inbound provisioning. Now let's look at the outbound provisioning. So for outbound provisioning, we need two identity providers for this identity server for this demonstration. So as I explained you earlier, outbound provisioning provision users to a trusted identity provider. So from the WSO2 identity provider. So this trusted identity provider can be a Google, Salesforce, or any identity provider that support inbound authentication. So the WSO2 Identity Server is supporting inbound authentication. So I'm using WSO2 Identity Server as the trusted identity provider. So I already configured another WSO2 identity provider, and it is up and running in my local machines. So it is up in 944 port. So I'm going to log into this. So if I configure the outbound provisioning in my identity WSO2 identity provider, that the user should be a true outbound provisioning configuration. Though this user supposed to be provisioned in my trusted identity provider. So first see if there is any user in the trusted identity provider. So under user sections, there is a Jack and admin user are there. So let me first let's create the configurations. For that, you need to configure the identity provider. Just add the identity provider here. Just login. Identity provider, and then you need to, under outbound provisioning connectors, you will see the Google, Salesforce, and the scheme provisioning configurations. So these demonstrations I'm using scheme provision configurations. So if you are, when your configurations you are using Google or Salesforce, you can do add your Google and Salesforce configurations here. So in the scheme provisioning, I'm adding the username passwords of my trusted identity provider. In this case, it's admin. And the user endpoint. So user endpoints where we need to provision, do the outbound provisioning, and then you need to register it. Seems like it's already created. Okay, so Okay, so now we go to the, now we need to configure the resident service provider, identity provider we just created in our service, in our resident service provider. So under the inbound provision configurations, let me go back. You will see the identity provider which we just created. So just add it and you need to update it. Okay, now we did the outbound provision configuration. So let's create the user. Let's create a called Tom and create username and the password. Finish it. Okay, now the Tom user got created. So let's check if the Tom user got created in our trusted identity provider. Okay, so the Tom user got created here. So now the we configured the outbound provisioning and the Tom user provision in our trusted identity provider. So that's how we do the provisioning using outbound provisioning. Now let's look at how we do the just-in-time provisioning. So to do that, as I explained you earlier, so just-in-time provision users to the identity server at the times of federated authentication. So it is triggered when the identity server received a positive authentication response from the external identity provider. So for that also we need, as I show in the outbound provisioning configurations. So for that also we need two identity server. So we can use the your JIT provisioning as Google or Facebook or anything, but in this demonstrations I'll be using another WSO2 identity server. So first let me delete what we already created here. Incident. I'll Okay, so now you need to configure the SP in the, okay, so before that I'll like this. So for this demonstrations, I'll taking, as I explained you earlier, I'll taking the two IC instances for this. So WSO2 IS, which provide JIT provisioning as IS1, and the WSO2 identity server act as the identity provider. I'm calling this IS2. So the identity server which up and running with 9444 port, I'm calling this identity provider as IS2, and this 9443 I call is IS1. So now let's configure the service provider in IS2. So go into there and let's check if we have any service provider in here. We have the service provider. Let me do this. Service providers. So first, let's create an service provider. Register it. And under the inbound authentication configuration and the OpenID configurations, you need to configure the service provider. So now you need to add your callback URL, which is common auth URL of the IS1. So I'm adding the common auth URL of the IS1 and then add it. And then you will receive the client ID and the client secret of the SP. Now Let's configure the IS2 as an identity provider with JIT provisioning in IS1. So for that, you need to go back to the IS1 and create the identity provider. Identity provider, and then under the federate authentication, OpenID Connect configurations, you need to add the client ID and client secrets, which we just created in the SP. Yes. And secrets. And then you need to add the authorized endpoint where we need to do the federate authentication. There is authorization endpoints and also the token endpoint. And you need to tick here. And then you need to configure the just-in-time provisioning configurations. So in here, you need to pick the provision silence. So in this demonstrations, I'll be using provision silently. So you can try these options as well. So register this. So let me create it again because I already added it previously. Okay, so now we created the identity provider. Now you need to configure service provider. For this, you can add any of the applications. So any application as a service provider, but to this demonstrations, I'll be using a WSO2 sample application, which is playground sample application. So it is already configured in my local machine. So and it is up and running now. So under the, now let's add the service provider. So, and let's check if there is any, let's do this. So let's add the service provider. And then under the inbound authentication configuration, OpenID Connect configuration, you need to add the sample application callback URL. It's O2 client, and then add it. Okay, so now you need to add your identity provider in local outbound authentication configurations. So under the federate, you need to select the federate authentication, and you need to select the identity provider. This is what we created in IS1. So update it. Okay, now all just-in-time provisioning configurations are done. So let's first check if there is any users in this IS2. So users, and we have Jack and Tom, and let's see if those are the same in okay, Jack and Tom. Okay, so I'm going to create a user here. So add new user, and I'll create a Alex user with the password. Okay, now we created the Alex user. So now let's, this is the sample application. So I'm as a client ID, I'm going to add the our sample application client ID. You can find under inbound authentication. So this is the client ID. So you can copy this and this. Okay. So when you do the authorizations, you will be directing to the Identity Server, which we do the federate authentication. So let's try to log in with the Alex user, which we created just now. So once you log into this with the Alex user has to be provisioned by using a JIT provisioning in the IS1. So log into the, it's asking consents. Okay, so now we successfully federate authenticated to the IS1. Now let's look at the user list here. Okay, so now our Alex user got provision using a JIT provisioning in our IS1. So these are some basic configurations what I just now demonstrations in inbound, outbound, and just in time provisioning. So there are plenty of configurations you can do in here. So, and please try these options, so you will get more clear picture on this provisioning methods. So that's about it on the hands-on session. So if you have any questions regarding this, so please feel free to add your questions in our YouTube live chat. So we'll wait for a few seconds here. So yeah. Let me check. Yeah. Let's wait for a few more minutes. Okay, so there is no question for the moment, so we can wind up the session. Before that, so guys, please follow up. Please follow up our YouTube channel and also subscribe the YouTube channel, and also follow us on Twitter. So hope to guys see you on the next sessions. Bye. So that's the session. Before that, so guys, please follow up our YouTube channel and also subscribe the YouTube channel, and also follow us on Twitter. Hope to guys see you on the next session. Bye.